want to introduce to you the hope for the future, as far as I'm concerned. I fell in love with these two. They are siblings, Goni and Tammuz. They are both mathematicians. Goni is a freshman at Mills. He's 16, he's a freshman at Cal. These kids, they take off from school on Yom HaShoah every year, and the family sits and discusses the Holocaust with their grandmother, who was a survivor. It's very inspiring to me, and I'm sure it will be to you.
Thank you so much for coming here today. We're grateful to have this opportunity to share our family stories with all of you.
We are the proud descendants of the famous Jewish historian and philosopher Simon de Beauvoir, who was murdered by the Nazis during the violent liquidation of the Riga ghetto. It has been said that de Beauvoir's murder symbolized the death of autonomism as a force in Jewish politics. Jewish autonomism was de Beauvoir's belief that Jews could live anywhere in the world and maintain their ability without assimilating. He was proven wrong during World War II. According to a few survivors, de Beauvoir repeated to ghetto inhabitants, Jews, write and record. And that is why we are here today, to write and record our stories. It is our responsibility as Jews, descendants of Holocaust survivors, and human beings to care and cherish one another's lives, to remember this painful and tragic memory, and forever pass on the lessons learned and the stories of those who lost everything. And that is the reason we are here today.
Our grandmother, Helena, was born in Lvov in 1940 by the name of Zuta. This was the time when the Germans first invaded Poland. Her parents were taken and murdered by their own neighbors and friends when she was less than 1 year old. Before the Nazis had built any ghettos, they declared that the general public was permitted to murder Jews. This was known as the first akcja, or pogrom. The local Ukrainian nationalists gathered the Jews and slaughtered them with axes. Her parents, my great-grandparents, were doctors who devoted their lives to helping others, but when the Germans came, there was no one to help them. They were brutally murdered, leaving my grandma as an orphan baby. The baby was then taken by her aunt Eva. Eva knew that her time was limited and made an arrangement with a Polish neighbor to save the baby. The baby was trained to sleep in a small opening behind a picture. This way, she would be used to be in a hiding place without crying. And when the time came and Eva was taken away by the Nazis, she signaled the neighbor by leaving the window open and the curtains down. The Polish neighbor then snuck in through the window late at night and took my grandma. This woman, who was risking her life to save an orphan Jewish girl, had a son who was working for the Nazis. That son was so devoted to the Nazi ideology that he was threatening to turn his own mother in. In the end of the war, he committed suicide, unable to cope with the defeat of the Germans. During the war, out of fear of her son's threats, her husband's arguing against saving the baby, and the neighbors' increasing suspicions, the woman was no longer able to care for my grandmother and passed the baby to her sister, Maria. Maria had the papers of a Polish girl who she used to babysit named Helena, and used that girl's identity as a cover for my grandma. My grandmother, who was born as Zuta, became Helena. Maria took Helena and raised her in her house, but as time went on, the neighbors became suspicious, as minor details did not match between our grandmother and the girl she claimed to be. Out of fear, they moved houses every time gossip from the neighbors hinted that the girl might be Jewish. Helena was raised as an ordinary Christian girl, unaware that she was Jewish. She spent the rest of the war with this woman. During a time of widespread famine, she was lucky to have been in a household with barely enough food to survive. After the war, hungry, sick, and suffering from a vitamin deficiency, she was unable to walk, but lucky enough to have been alive. Another unbelievable story is that of a Jewish woman named Urana. who also managed to survive. Escaping concentration camps and losing all of her family, she had nothing but the number she bore on her hand to remind her of her past. Irena was searching for any relatives or anyone she knew that might still be alive. She found this orphan Jewish girl in very poor conditions. She came and took her away, claiming her as a relative, and took her for Maria, receiving full custody. Our grandma had to endure a very tough and bitter woman and a new Jewish identity. My grandma later described to us that for her, the Holocaust was not over until 1971, when she finally left the land that was for her one big cemetery. She is now living in Israel.
From the 150,000 Jews who lived in Lvov before the war, a mere 1,000 survived. The other 149,000 were not as fortunate. Each person that managed to stay alive now has an unbelievable story that they have to pass on, in the memory of all the others who could not survive to tell their stories. Not me, nor my 5 siblings would have been here today if one small detail in that long chain of events would have differed. The people who raised her and hid her during the war weren't just saving my grandmother, they were saving us. Especially when Ukrainian nationalists who were personally responsible for the pogrom that killed Helena's parents are now promoted to national heroes instead of what they really are, collaborators with Nazis responsible for the killing of thousands. Our family's history is what gives us this passion to hold on to tradition and follow in the footsteps of the loved ones who were taken away. It is important for us to carry on our family name and honor to be associated with it, respecting and keeping in our hearts the ancestors who suffered an untimely death. This history brings us closer together as a family as we yearly gather, grieve, and speak of those horrors during Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. We do not ask everyone to grieve as we do on that day, but we do ask you to respect the importance of it to our family, to Jews, and to the state of Israel. History should never repeat itself, and it is our duty to stop this darker side of human nature who are provoking people to hurt each other to such great levels.
Tfilah 18 says, Mi kamocha be'elim, mi kamocha, who like you, and be'elim, not among the gods, but among the mute. Since God is mute, it is our responsibility to speak up.
As Simon Dubnov said,
Write and record.
let our stories be told, so this will never happen again.